All right, so now we're going to continue on with the site cell. So when we last left off, we had started by importing a table view cell by adding a new file. And just to recap, we would right click and go add a new file. And we would say iOS source Cocoa Touch class. And I'm going to cancel out of this, but it would be a subclass of UI table view cell. That's the object we were adding in. So I'm going to cancel out of this because we already created an object called site cell. And within site cell.h, we have our child object being UI table view cell. And we went ahead and we defined 3 items that were going to be inside our cell. We defined a UI label, primary label, a UI label called secondary label, and a UI image view called my image view. And we did property declarations for these. Now what's peculiar about these is that up until now, we've been doing declarations for any GUI related item, but putting the word IB outlet in front. Right? So up until we've been putting IB outlet out in front. This time around we're not, because we're not going to use Interface Builder to connect these items up. We're not going to do that at all. You could actually. You can create custom cells in Interface Builder, and that'd be good enough. But for this, we're going to actually create it by code, because we actually have the ability to create apps without storyboards, without nib files, just purely in code, and adding this stuff in code, which is a painful process, takes a lot longer. But we're going to illustrate this activity here for using code to add graphics to the screen or add items to the screen. So we're not going to use IB outlet in this case. So we have 3 items: primary label, secondary label, and my image view. And then we move over to site cell.m, and originally what was given to us are these 2 methods, awake from nib and set selected. And awake from nib is basically almost like the viewDidLoad type method, except it's executed before viewDidLoad. Now in this case, we don't have a viewDidLoad, but we do have an init constructor that we could add in. This awake from nib is implemented after a constructor. So the constructor happens first. The init constructor happens first, and then this awake from nib would happen after. Now we actually added this in ourselves last time around. So we created a constructor called init with style. Right? And so we took init with style because it was the same init with style that we used in our table method. So if we jump to choose site view controller, inside the self-road index path, we have here init with style that we called up. So now we're going to basically override this method with our own custom information. So jumping back to site cell.m, we started off with the usual things we do inside a constructor. So we called the super constructor, right? And we did an if statement to make sure that the super constructor executed properly. We returned ourself as well afterwards. So we got the basic shell out of the way. But the question is, what goes inside the if statement for this case? Now, what we normally do in a constructor is initialize things. And so in this case, what we're going to do is initialize our 3 items and add them to the screen. So what we're going to do with initializing is we are going to start by instantiating primary label. So we're going to go ahead and say primary label equals UI label alloc and init. Right? So basically it's just instantiating a UI label object. Now at this point, what we want to do is configure this UI label. In storyboards, we would have just done a few not drag and drops, but like, click of a checkbox here or there, modified some settings, but we would have done a number of things in Interface Builder. Here we're going to have to do it by hand and in code. So for example, maybe we'll set the text alignment to be left justified. So we'll say primary label dot text alignment is equal to ns text alignment left. So you see we have left, natural, right, and justified. But we'll choose left. So we'll make our text left justified. We can play around with the font. So we'll say primary label dot font is equal to, and we'll just use the system font. So we'll say UI font, system font of size. We'll go an 18 font here. Right, so we're using an 18 font. At this point, let's set the color. Now, I'm going to go on a limb and actually set the background color for this UI label. And I'll talk about that in a second. So we'll say primary label dot background color is equal to UI color clear color. Now, why am I setting the background color to clear? Well, by default, the background of the label is white. So if you ever take an image as a background, say stretch it all the way to the size of your screen, and you put a label on top of that item, it actually looks like a white box with text on top of it, which doesn't look very nice. And so you would go into the settings in Interface Builder, and you would actually set the background color to clear so that your label would actually nicely and naturally overlap a background image. And so we want to do that here as well, because even though this is a table, there may be, you still may want to put in a nice background image on your view and then put the table on top and then put the cells on top inside the table, right? And so you want to make sure that your labels are clear so that it overlaps naturally onto that background image. So it's just a little trick there to making your apps look nice. So we're going to set the background color for the label to a clear color. And then we're going to set the text color to black. So we'll say primary label dot text color is equal to UI color black color. And so that's it with the primary label. Now the secondary label, on the other hand, we're going to go through the exact same motions again. So I won't type it out a second time. I'll just simply copy and paste and just replace primary label with secondary label. And we'll do a couple of minor modifications as well. So first thing I'm going to do is change primary label to secondary label. Right? So we have secondary label as well initialized, but a couple of things I want to change with secondary label because it should be different from primary label. So first thing, I want to change the font size to be smaller. So I want to go with 12 font here instead of 18. Right? So we're going to use a 12 font. And the second thing is the color. Let's make it blue instead of black. So I'm going to change this last item to blue color, just to differentiate it, change it up a bit. So we have our primary label, which is black, and our secondary label, which is blue. The primary label is an 18 font, and the secondary label is a 12 font. Now, if you recall, we talked about our UI labels being 20 pixels high. So the 18 font rests nicely within the 20 pixels, right? And the 12 definitely rests nicely within the 20 pixel height for the label. So we're within our bounds. So now we have our primary label and our secondary label configured, initialized and configured the way we want it. The next thing we're going to configure is the image view. And all we're going to do is just initialize the image view because the rest of the configuration for the image view will happen in the table cell. So we're just going to say down here, my image view is equal to UI image view. Notice that there was a UI image that popped up here. So we're going to talk about UI image versus UI image view in a moment. But for now, we have UI image view, alloc, and init. Now I have one too many pairs of brackets. I'm going to fix that. There. So we're initializing or instantiating UI image view, my image view. So at this point, we have our image view and our primary and secondary label all set up. But they have to be added to the screen. So now we have to take these three items and say, let's add these to the screen. So the command we're going to use is very similar to what we saw in the app delegate. We're going to say self.contentView add subview. Now that should sound familiar. Add subview. Because we used add subview in our flip methods, right? So flip to choose site, flip to view site. We used add subview there, right? And notice the argument is a UI view object. Now, our primary label, our secondary label, and our UI, our myImageView are GUI elements of type UI label and type UI image view, respectively, but they are child objects of UI view. So we can pass each one of these items into this method here. So we're going to start by passing in myImageView, and then do the same for the other two. So we're going to say self.contentView, add subview, and primary label, and then self.contentView, add subview, and then secondary label. Right? And so we've already returned self, so we're done with the constructor. The purpose of the constructor was to basically instantiate and initialize the items and add them to the screen. So every time this cell gets instantiated, which happens inside the table method, it's going to add itself to the screen. Okay? Okay, so now that we have configured the items themselves, the next step is to actually configure the XY location and the width and the height of these items. And we're going to take advantage of an object called CGRect, or rectangle essentially, is what rect is short for. So, like I was saying earlier, there's a ton of CG-based objects that are available in iOS, and they're very powerful. There's CG point, CG frame, CG rect. They're all very powerful. They all have a lot of different transforms you could do, check to see if one exists inside another. Very powerful functions that go along with it. We're just going to start with using CGRect today, and we're going to use it for placement of these objects. So placement happens in another method that isn't mentioned here. It's a method, a void return type that we're going to add in called layout subviews. So it's here, it's the last item in the list. So layout subviews is what we're going to add as a method. And we're going to call the super objects layout subviews. So we're going to say super layout subviews. Right? So we're going to call super layout subviews. Now we've already discussed our XY location, our width and height for each of these different objects. So now it's our job to actually place these physically on the screen in the right locations with the right sizes. So we're going to use an object called, we're going to call it frame of type CGRect. So we're going to say CGRect frame. And so frame, we're using the same name as an object that exists in every single UI element. So if you notice in Interface Builder, when we chose the fourth inspector, which was the size inspector, there was an XY location, a width and a height we could have manually set for each individual item we dragged onto the screen, right? So so those individual items we were setting, the XY, width, and height, were actually saved into an object called frame. So everything here has something called frame, and we're gonna work with it right now. The first thing we want to do is create, or basically initialize this object. So these CG objects are special. They don't have init methods like we're accustomed to with the different objects we've instantiated. We're going to use a special function called CGRectMake. So we're going to say frame is equal to CGRectMake. And its arguments are x, y, width, and height. Those are the four things we're going to pass in. So we'll start with the x. So what we're going to do here is configure the myImageView object. And we already defined those settings already. So it's going to be 5 by 5. So x will be 5, y will be 5, width will be 40 and height will be 40 by 40. So width is 40, height is 40. So this is now going to be 5 pixels over, 5 pixels down from the origin of the table cell. And its width will be 40 pixels, its height will be 40 pixels. And then the next step is to basically save this to my image view. So every UI element has a frame variable. So we're going to say my image view dot frame, and notice that it's of type CGRect as well. So every time in Interface Builder we change x, y, width, or height, it is updating this frame variable with the x, y, width, and height. So we'll just say my image view dot frame is equal to frame. And now my image view is configured. Now the next step, let's do the primary label. And we can just reuse this frame object. We don't need to redeclare something. So we're just going to say frame is equal to CGRect make. Again, we're not losing the frame from my image view because it's saved there already. Now, this one was going to be 110 over, 5 down. Its width will be 260, and its height will be 20. Now we'll just say primary label dot frame is equal to frame. We'll do the same for secondary label. So we'll say frame equals CGRect make. This will be 110 over, 30 down, 260, 40. Sorry, 20. And then secondary label dot frame is equal to frame. And that's it. The cell is now configured. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to choose-site-view-controller.m. And we ended off at cell-for-row index path, and we used a generic cell. What we're going to do now is we're going to use this customized cell we just created. So first thing to do is to import the header file for sitecell.h. So I jump back to the top of the file and add an import under app delegate. So import sitecell.h. Right, so we brought in the sitecell.h file. Now we can actually start using the sitecell.h file in this file, or in this object. So now we'll jump back to self-road index path. So now we'll jump back to self-road index path. And everywhere that we mentioned UI table view cell, we're going to change it to site cell. So we'll start over here at the point we were dequeuing a cell object to see if it was leaving the screen and reformat. So we're going to change this to site cell. And so we'll keep the rest of the code here, but we're going to cast this to be a site cell object. So we'll add in a little site cell star. So now we have our site cell object that we are referring to here. The next thing is to look at if cell is nil, and we say cell equals UI table view cell. We got to change that to site cell. Everything else stays the same. A init style, we create our own init style. We are passing in these arguments as well. Nothing changes here. But site cell is now the object we are instantiating. And that means that we can now go down to where we are populating the data and go ahead and modify the data inside site cells. So we actually have cell. Instead of text label, we have primary label. So we have now cell.primarylabel.text. Right? So we're still keeping the list data, but now we're going to populate secondary label. So we'll say cell.secondarylabel.text is equal to, and our array that had all of the URLs is located here under site data, object at index, row. So now we have our secondary label, which is our URL for this particular sports team. Now it's going to be on the page. The last thing is the image view. And so the image view, we're going to say cell.myImageView.image is equal to, and so now we're going to take advantage of a UI image object. So we're going to say UI image named, and we'll look into the image data array and say object at index row. All right, so the myImageView object is of type UIImageView. The image variable within the myImageView object or UIImageView object is of type UIImage. So the UIImage object handles interfacing with the physical file, like abc.jpg, or in our case, marleys.jpg, jays.jpg, and so on. And the myImageView object handles interfacing with the physical screen, so the user can see that image. So that's how they work. They work hand in hand. So at this point, we could take this and run this now. So I choose iPhone 5S and run it. All right, so now it's loaded. We look at Let's Begin. We should see our table cells look like this. The cells, clicking on them, don't do anything yet, but at least for now, we should have a logo and some text on each side. And if we were to, we actually also have the ability to, if we click on a cell like this, maybe change the font color to red, or increase the font size, or increase the image size by using the setSelected method inside the site, inside sitecell.m, and modifying that. But for now, we have a table that works. All right, so now that we got the table page to display correctly, the next step is to get these going, get these event handlers going. So now what we're going to do is we're going to implement another method in choose_site_viewcontroller.h. It's the event handler that we're going to implement here. That'll allow us to do something upon clicking on the table cell itself. So this method has a void return type. So we're going to have void here. And we're going to start typing the word table. There's still a bunch of methods that pop up, but we're looking for did select row at index path. So now you have to be very careful, because there's another method in this list called did deselect row at index path, and it's the opposite of what we want. We want did select row at index path. So did select row at index path, this method, when I choose it, this method acts as an event handler for when I click on a particular cell. Whereas did deselect row at index path, it works a little bit funny. What happens is that it gets executed upon leaving a cell. So meaning if I click on a cell, nothing's going to happen. When I click on a second cell, then it goes ahead and it executes what was there before. So it's kind of strange. You can experiment and try it out, but it's a really strange method. So what we want to do here is we want to call flip to view site. So we're going to call up app delegate again. So we're going to say app delegate. We'll call it main delegate equals, and then app delegate star UI application, shared application, and delegate. Okay. And we want to call main delegate flip to view site. So we can go to the view site view controller page. Now this would be enough to get us to the web view page. But here's the thing. We need to have a way of providing the next page with the URL that was for the cell that was clicked. We need to tell it what cell was clicked, or at least what URL to go to on the web page. So we need to pass something over. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this. We could pass this in through the NSBundle variable, but we're not going to do that here. What we're going to do instead is we're going to create a variable inside app.delegate where we can save the currently selected URL. All right, and the reason we're going to choose app.delegate is because it is the central object where it only gets instantiated once and never again, and so whatever variables we set there will only ever be there. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So we're going to jump over to app.delegate.h for a second. We're going to create another variable here of type NSString. I'm going to call it selected URL and do a property declaration for it. And don't forget to synthesize it as well. So inside app.delegate.h, we're going to synthesize selected URL. And so now that we have it synthesized, we have it declared inside app.delegate.h, we can go ahead and use it inside our event handler. So jumping back to choose_site_viewcontroller.m, just before flip to view site, we're going to say main delegate.selected URL is equal to site data object.index, and then we're going to pull out the row number. The row number exists inside index path, so we're going to say index path dot row. So that's our selected URL. So now that we have the URL, now we can go inside our view site object, view site view controller object, and get the image, the URL to display. So we have our event handler done. We can jump over to view site viewcontroller.h and start configuring this object. Now, if you recall, this object had a web view on it and had an activity indicator on it. So we got to add those variables in and connect them up. All right, so now we're going to move into the view site view controller and get the web view to display. So one of the first things we have to do is bring in the interface for web view delegate. So UI web view delegate, in order to get the activity indicator to start and stop. We'll also define as IB outlets UI web view. We'll just call it web view. And then our IB outlet UI activity indicator view, we'll just call it activity. And we'll do the property declarations for them. So non-atomic and strong. All right, and so our header file is done. So now we just have two items, the activity indicator view and the web view. So now we have our header file configured. Let's go ahead and do the view site view controller. So we got to bring in app.delegate.h. Right, we have a couple of things to do here. First thing is we got to handle our event handler for going back. So we'll say IB action, go back is the name of the event handler, and we'll just call up app delegate again, main delegate, and then within it we'll just call main delegate flip to view site home. So that handles our back button. The other thing is inside view.Load we want to configure the web view. So we're going to use our standard lines, but we also want to bring in app delegate again. So we're going to say app delegate again, main delegate, and then just say main delegate. So now at this point, we're going to call up our code for getting the web view to configure itself. So the first line was to define the URL itself. So we'll just say ns URL. Let's call it URL address is equal to ns URL, URL with string. And here we're just going to pull out the variable we saved inside the app delegate. So we're going to say main delegate selected URL. So we have our URL now that we pulled from the app delegate. So in the past we've been hard coding our URLs for this line of code. This time around we're letting the user choose the URL that we're going to go to. So first thing is we're define the URL itself. Next thing we'll do is define the request object. So we'll say ns URL request. Just call it URL is equal to ns URL request, and then request with URL, and just pass in URL address. And the final step is to basically tell the web view to make it happen. So we'll say web view load request, and before I type in load request, you'll notice above it there's load HTML string. So you could actually provide your own HTML and create your own HTML web page and pass it into the web view, but have all your HTML code be inside an NS string object. So you can create your own customized web pages to display in the web view. So if you want to really jazz up your projects or your apps or whatnot. But we're going to choose load request and pass in URL. And the next step is we'll create the methods to get the web view to start and stop the activity indicator. So we'll create the first one, void return type. So we'll say web view did start load. And so we'll get the activity to unhide itself to no, and activity start animating. Then we'll create the other method, void return type, web view did finish load. And so we'll say activity set hidden to yes, and activity stop animating. All right, and at this point, we can connect everything up. So we'll move over to view site view controller.xib because we're basically done with all of the code here in the view site view controller m file. So we'll move over to view site view controller.xib and connect everything up. So highlighting files owner, we're going to connect go back to the back button. IB. And if we click on the web view, we connect delegate to files owner. And now we could run this, but we'll probably run into a problem here, even though everything's connected up. Okay, so we'll hit let's begin. Click on, say, Marley's, for example. And we should see an error message here. So it says here, app transport security is blocked to clear text HTTP. We discovered this in a previous app. And our solution at that point was to use HTTPS-based URLs. Here, for this example, we want to illustrate these websites, and these websites doesn't have an HTTPS version of itself. So we want to get this to display. There is a workaround for this. There's two workarounds, actually. One is to specify individual websites that are permitted to access this. And because of time considerations here, we're not going to go that approach. We're going to go the second approach, which is to say allow all websites to be viewed on the web view, which is insecure and unsafe, but we're going to do it anyway because of time here. So the way we do that is to go inside a file called info.plist. So we have it down here. Now info.plist is a file, it's a configuration file that handles a lot of the settings here. And so some of these settings that you see here also exist inside our project settings as well. All right. But sometimes there's really obscure project settings we need to add into our project that can only be done here in info.plist. So we're going to go here and we're going to highlight the first thing, which says information property list, and you'll see a plus sign. We just mouse over it. If I click on that plus sign, it'll add a new item to this list of properties. So after I hit the plus sign, I'm going to start typing the word app transport. So app transport security settings. And I'll hit OK. Or hit enter. So it adds a new category called app transport security settings. And what I'm going to do is, this is a bit tricky here. This next step is a bit tricky, but I'm going to start by hitting the arrow, let it expand, even though there's nothing there. And then continue to mouse over this, and click on the plus sign. And this is tricky because it should, and it did nicely for me, but sometimes it won't. It'll add another category inside this category that only has two options here, which is what we want. If you have a list of like 10 items or more, you got to hit the minus sign, delete it, and try to hit the plus sign again. But making sure that the little arrow is expanded over here. I think that's what does the trick to this. We're going to choose allow arbitrary loads. Now the second option, exception domains, is the approach you would take for including individual websites. But because there's a bit of a process to it, we're going to leave it alone. So we're just going to choose allow arbitrary loads. Hit enter and change no to yes. And now we can run it again, and it should work this time. So we'll hit let's begin. I'll start with Marley's. And it loads the Marley's website. Hit back, choose Raptors, and it loads the Raptors website. Choose Jay's, so it loads the Jay's website. Right. FC, right, and it loads the FC website, right? So essentially, this app is complete at this point. Okay, so at this point, this app is complete, but let's take this app a step further and make it into a universal app. So previously, we created an app that was an iPad app exclusively. We looked a little bit at how we could control code for iPhone versus iPad if we want to run this on an iPhone. We did a little bit of that, but now we're going to do is take this full app and turn this into a full-fledged iPad and iPhone app under one app. So the first thing we're going to do is go into our nibs folder, and we're going to add a few more nib files. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a group first. So I'm going to right-click and say new group, and say this group we call iPhone 5. And I'm going to move my 3 nib files, not the launch screen, but my 3 nib files into that folder. All right. Then I create another group called iPad. All right. So inside iPhone 5, I have my current nib files, right? I still have launch screen.storyboard, but I have these. Now for the iPad, I'm going to add new files to it. So I'm going to right click on iPad and go new file. And this will be iOS user interface view. Then I'll hit next. I'm going to call this view-ipad.xib. Okay. So it's going to create a new home page for me. We're going to configure it manually. So I'm going to have view-ipad.xib. I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to say new file, iOS user interface view. This one will be called choose site view controller -ipad.xib. .xib. And I'll hit create. And I do one more. So I'm going to right click on iPad, new file, iOS user interface view. And this one will be called view site view controller -ipad.xib. And I hit create. So now I've got 3 more nib files here. They all have the same names as the original nib files we created earlier, but just have -ipad next to it, just so we know that they're meant for iPad. Okay. We would actually take this step further. If we want to make iPhone 6 ones, we make a group with iPhone 6 and make iPhone 6 nib files. So we could do the same idea as well for different devices. We're just going to stick to iPad to make this a fully universal app. So we'll start with view.ipad-ipad.xib, and we'll start configuring it. So the first step we're going to do is go to Files Owner. So highlighting Files Owner. And we'll start off in the third option, which is the Identity Inspector, and choose the correct view controller object to associate with it. So I'm going to type in view, and you'll notice that it auto-completes the view controller, which is what I want. All right. So highlighting Files Owner, choosing the third option here, class should be view controller. And then if I hit the arrow, or the sixth option, which is the connections inspector, I see view. I need to connect view to view. So I need to connect view to view. Okay. We're going to do this 2 more times, so don't worry, you'll get this. And then I'm going to click on the identity inspector, or sorry, I'm going to click on view first, and then click on the the attributes inspector, and I'm going to configure it for an iPad. So the size will be iPad full screen. Notice there's an iPad Pro full screen, which has a higher res screen. So we'll choose iPad full screen. We'll do orientation portrait. Right. So I have my iPad screen here. And I'm going to add a label and a button to it. So the iPad gets a bit tricky to configure. But we're going to try and make this look as good as we can. So this will be centered. We'll say nibs and tables to iPad edition. And I'm going to choose another color. I'm going to choose red, just so it really stands out. Increase the font. See how far we can take this. So we have this. Let's center it. Good. So it's centered. And let's add a button. Maybe down here. All right. So the button will say, "Let's begin again." All right. Maybe we can increase the font on that as well, just so it really stands out. Make sure it's centered. There we go. So let's begin. All right. And we can connect things up. So let's connect up the event handler. So highlighting files owner, highlighting the connections inspector, we should see that let's begin method and do a touch up inside. All right. So the home page is configured. So we'll save that. Then we'll jump over to choose site, view controller iPad.xib. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to basically configure it, but for the iPad now. So start off with files owner, highlighting the third option, the identity inspector. We're going to start typing in choose, and choose site view controller should come up. And then we'll highlight the connections inspector. We see view, connect that to view. So same thing again. All right. Hit view, configure the size under the fourth option, which is the attributes inspector. Size will be iPad full screen. Orientation, portrait. And here, we're going to add our nav bar at the top. And we just basically configure it the way we did for the choose site XIB file. It looks exactly the same. So we'll say nav bar, put that at the top. Gets a bit tricky to configure, but we'll try it out. There. Change the title to choose site. And it changed the color, the bar tint, to red. And then add a bar button item for the back button. So bar button item. Change the word back. All right. And then add a table to fill up the rest of the screen. So table view. All right. So now we've dragged in our table. Connect everything up. So for table, data source and delegate connected to files owner. Highlighting files owner, we do have our back method, so we're going to connect that to the back button. All right, so the table is done. This page is done for the iPad. Now let's do the last one, view site view controller. So we're going to choose view site view controller, do the exact same motions again, highlighting files owner, going to the identity inspector, and start typing in view site view controller. All right. Going over to the connections inspector, we'll connect view to view. And highlighting view, we'll choose the attributes inspector. Size will be iPad full screen. Orientation, portrait. And let's start with adding the navigation bar to this. So we'll say navigation bar. This will just say view site. Make the bar tint red. And add a bar button item for the back button. And that will just say back. And we'll add a web view now. So basically same thing we did with the original page. So web view. Okay. And then last thing is we'll connect up the activity indicator and the web view. So, oh, we didn't connect the activity yet. So we gotta add the activity. So we'll just configure that to be a large white. And I'll go with red for the activity for consistency. And now we can go ahead and connect everything up. So activity to activity, web view, highlighting web view, delegate to files owner. Okay, so we have all of our iPad methods. Okay, we have all of our iPad methods. And now what we can do is we could run this and see what happens if I choose an iPad. So I'm going to choose an iPad 2. I'm going to run this. All right, so you're probably noticing here that the app is very small. And everything here still works, but look at the look of it. Now what we did is we already created the nib files for the iPad. But the problem is it's calling the wrong nib file. So it's still calling the nib files for the iPhone 5. We got to fix that. So the best way to do that is to go into, we'll start with appdelegate.m. And let's look at all of the code here. Now, if we start with, I'm going to start with did finish launching actually. And if we look at did finish launching here, there is that line where we are instantiating the view controller, but we're requesting view as our nib file. And we need to be able to control that. We need to be able to set it up so that it chooses the right nib file to load. So what we're going to do is, because that argument for the nib file name is a string, I'm going to create a variable, type ns_string. I'm just going to call it nib name. And then we'll just do an if UI underscore user interface idiom equals UI user interface idiom pad. There we go. If it's that, then we'll set nib name equal to view-ipad. Else, we'll set nib name equal to view, or just view. All right? And so we'll just change this to nib name. All right. So now it'll choose the right nib file name for us. And we're going to do the exact same thing in flip to view site and flip to choose site. We'll do the exact same thing there. So you'll see this again inside flip to choose site. So we're going to create a variable again, nib name. So we'll say ns_string nib name. We'll say if UI underscore user interface idiom equals UI user interface idiom pad, nib name is equal to, we're going to say choose site view controller dash iPad, else we're going to say nib name is equal to choose site view controller. And then all we're going to do here is change this to nib name. And we'll just go to flip to view site and do the same thing. Create a variable called ns_string nib name is equal to, well, won't set equal to anything. We'll just do the same if statement. UI underscore user idiom, UI user interface idiom pad. We'll set nib name to, and then view site view controller dash iPad, else nib name is equal to view site view controller. And we'll change init with nib name to nib name. And now we can go ahead and run this thing. Before I do, I'm just going to jump back to did finish launching. Yep, we did that correctly there, so everything's correct. So now I can go ahead and launch this thing. And let's see what happens now. So our launch screen, we can't do much about it right now. We can fix it another time. But for time's sake, let's just look at what's here. So we have our home page now. It says iPad edition, right? So it's loading it properly. Hit let's begin. It loads the table. Now, okay, here's the thing about the table though. Our nav bar is correct, but our table is still small. And that's because the table cells are configured for still an iPhone. And we're going to fix that soon, all right? If I choose Marley's, for example, let it do its thing. It's going to load the web view as full screen. Now our nav bar is correct. Just a matter of our web view loading up properly, and here we go. Right? So the Marley's website loaded properly. If I go back, oh, forgot to connect the go back button, the go back method, which we'll fix in a moment. All right, by just going to view site view controller and fixing that. So I forgot to connect one method, the go back, which happens in iPad development. You tend to forget something here or there. But now, essentially, it'll work. So now looking at the iPad, we say begin. Look at how the cells are all squished up here. And even though the view is fine, I mean, you could tell from the nav bar that, hey, it's fitting the entire screen. The cells themselves need a bit of work. And so what we're going to do is we can start off by editing site cell and also edit one of the methods in the table view method, in the table view, the choose site view controller M file. But we'll start off with site cell by readjusting and reorganizing things. So what we'll do is we'll say if UI underscore user interface idiom equals UI user interface idiom pad. So meaning if it's the iPad we're dealing with, let's double the font size to or more than double. Yeah, let's double it to, let's say, 36. Right? So that'll double our font size. Otherwise, we'll keep it at 18. So we'll just copy and paste this. Keep it at 18. All right? So now if it's the iPad, the font size for primary label is going to double to 36. Otherwise, it'll stay at 18. And let's look at doing this for secondary label. So we'll go through the same motions again. We'll say if UI underscore user interface idiom equals UI user interface idiom pad, then we'll set the font size to, let's say, 24. We'll double it to 24 as well. Otherwise, we'll keep it at its current value of 12. So now the font size is adjusted for in this. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the placement of items. Because we have a bigger screen to work with, we got to go down to layout subviews. And what we'll do here is we'll create another if statement here. We'll say if UI underscore user interface idiom equals UI user interface idiom pad. What we'll do is we'll take all of these, put this inside here, and we'll make some adjustments in a second. But for our else statement, we want to keep what we have here. So we want to keep what we have here for the iPhone devices. And of course, we'll take it a step further and we would adjust it and fine-tune it for the other iPhone devices. But we'll leave it as such for this exercise today. All right. Now let's look at what a layout might look like for an iPad for this table cell. All right. So the first thing is that we have our image view. It's at 5.5. It's 40 by 40. We could move that up a bit. We could say 15 by 15 just to start off, and maybe double the graphic size to 80 by 80. All right. So that might increase and help with creating a bigger looking graphic. Then if we look at primary label, it starts over at 110. We move it over to 110. Let's push it over to, let's say, 200. And of course, this is just a bit of fine tuning here. And so we'll also make this 15 down to match up with the image view. And then the width we can increase from 260 to, let's say, 460 here. Right? And the height of the label will increase to 40 because the font size is now 36. So we'll increase it to 40. Now, of course, these are numbers you could play with and fine-tune. And 460, we should really line up with the size of the iPad or the width of the iPad. But if we were to look up the dimensions, just to double check. We may have even more space to play with as well. But just to play around and make things a little bit more fine-tuned for this exercise, we'll go with this. For secondary label, we want to match up with the 200 from above, just so it lines up nicely. We want to go with, let's say, 60 down, because we don't want to overlap. So we have 15 down plus the 40 height is 55. We'll add another 5 pixel buffer between it, so that'll end up with 60 over here. We'll go with the width of 460 and a height of 40 as well to match it up with the one above. And now we're at a height of 24 pixels for this guy, so we want to make sure that that's the case. And so we're almost there. The site cell is now configured and adjusted to the iPad. The only thing we want to do is go into choose site viewcontroller.m and have a look at height for row at index path. And for now, we're returning 60, but now on an iPad, that doesn't work very well. We want to increase that. So if we look at adding our user interface idiom line here, so we'll start off by saying if UI underscore user interface idiom equals UI user interface idiom pad, we'll return, well, we'll do more than double. We'll say 150. Otherwise, return 60. And so now if we run this on the iPad, let's see what it looks like. So we'll let the splash page be. That requires more work. We'll leave that for another exercise. But let's begin with this iPad edition. Now look at the cells. They look a lot more like they belong on an iPad. And of course, we could fine-tune this even further. Another extension would be to actually make this page landscape and have this on the left-hand side and have the right-hand side be the web view that would display the proper page using a split view controller. But that's an exercise for another day. And at this point, we could fine-tune this. We could adjust it further and make it look better. But we'll leave it at this. And so we'll consider this app complete. And then the next app, we're going to look at creating a database. We'll go back to storyboards, and we'll look at saving to a database using SQLite.